Hello, welcome everyone to today's webinar entitled Digital Transformation in B2B Marketing. This webinar is part of a special series of educational webinars to help you prepare for tomorrow. Please visit our website at teamlewis.com for recordings of previous webinars and to sign up for upcoming sessions. My name is Rosalie and I will be the moderator for today's event. Before we begin, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items regarding today's presentation. This is a live presentation through Zoom, so you may experience a slight delay as we click between slides. Our presentation will last approximately 30 minutes with some time for questions at the end. We'll have a recording of today's session available in a few days, and we'll send everyone an email with a link to the recording. All attendees will automatically be muted during today's sessions to cut down any background noise, but we do welcome your questions. Please submit your questions via the Q&A button found at the top of your screen, and we will address those as many as we can, time permitting, at the end. After the presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. Also, you can follow the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag IAT and by following us on @TeamLewisGlobal. Now, a little bit about Lewis and who we are. We are a global integrated communications agency providing full PR, marketing, and digital services with 30 offices around the globe. You can find out more by visiting us at teamlewis.com. Now, I'd like to introduce you to today's speaker. James Smee is a multi-award-winning digital marketer that's operated at C-level in a multitude of B2B sectors, both client and agency side. James co-founded and built from the ground up the highly decorated digital agency Purestone, with a final sale to global communications agency LEWIS in 2013. James now uses his love of marketing and business development to drive LEWIS's digital business across EMEA and remains as a strategic consultant for brands such as PayPal, Linklaters, and Adecco. With that, I will pass the presentation over to James.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to jump onto this webinar. So yeah, just to kind of round off my my kind of introduction there, I'm a 20 years B2B marketer. That's my background and my kind of passion. So these kind of subject areas and big shifts and trends within B2B always fascinate me, both from a kind of an occupational perspective, but also from the impact and the changes that I see it bringing into place within the brands that we work with. So without further ado, I'll kind of dive into the material here. But I just want to kick it off with a short video. It's 2 minutes long. Hopefully it translates across Zoom and you can all hear it and see it. But I think it's a good scene setter for what I want to talk about this morning.
Did you know the average person spends 4 years of his life looking down at his cell phone? Kinda ironic, ain't it? How these touch screens can make us lose touch. But it's no wonder in a world filled with iMacs, iPads, and iPhones, so many eyes, so many selfies, not enough us's and we's. See, technology has made us more selfish and separate than ever. Cause while it claims to connect us, connection has gotten no better. And let me express first, Mr. Zuckerberg, not to be rude, but you should reclassify Facebook to what it is, an anti-social network. Cause while we may have big friend lists, so many of us are friendless all alone. Cause friendships are more broken than the screens on our very phones. We sit at home on our computers measuring self-worth by numbers of followers and likes. Ignoring those who actually love us, it seems we'd rather write an angry post and talk to someone who might actually hug us. Am I bugging? You tell me, cause I asked a friend the other day, let's meet up face to face. They said, all right, what time you wanna Skype? I responded with OMG, SRS, and then a bunch of SMHs and realized, what about me? Do I not have the patience to have conversation without abbreviation? This is the generation of media overstimulation. Chats have been reduced to snaps. The news is 140 characters. Videos are 6 seconds at high speed. And you wonder why ADD is on the rise faster than 4G LTE. But get a load of this. Studies show the attention span of the average adult today is 1 second lower than that of a goldfish. So if you're one of the few people or aquatic animals that have yet to click off or close this video, congratulations. Let me finish by saying you do have a choice, yes. But this one, my friends, we cannot autocorrect. We must do it ourselves. Take control or be controlled, make a decision. Me, no longer do I want to spoil a precious moment by recording it with a phone. I'm just gonna keep them. I don't want to take a picture of all my meals anymore. I'm just gonna eat them. I don't want the new app, the new software, or the new update. And if I want to post an old photo, who says I have to wait until Thursday? I'm so tired of performing in the pageantry of vanity and conforming to this accepted form of digital insanity. Call me crazy, but I imagine a world where we smile when we have low batteries. Cause that'll mean we'll be one bar closer to humanity.
So I'll pause it. I'll pause it there. So that's a nice piece of stimulus to kind of set the scene for what I want to talk about. It's clearly a commentary around how digital has transformed our personal lives, the way we socially interact with one another, and how we lead our lives on a daily basis. And there's a fair amount of this kind of content out there where people are trying to kind of rebuff the kind of digital trends that are changing up our behaviours. So my kind of question really is, where does that leave us in B2B if there's this undoubted change in behaviours around how digital changes how we interact with things and interact with ourselves? How does that work within a kind of a B2B environment? So I just kind of finish off that kind of section and analysis by just telling a kind of a personal story here. So in May this year, I was lucky enough to go to Mauritius on holiday with my kids. Here I am in Heathrow Airport. Now, Mauritius is an amazing place. It's utterly beautiful. And it is also one of the main destinations for honeymooners. I think 60% of tourists in Mauritius fall under the bracket of newlyweds. So I found it fascinating and really disturbing to witness within the hotel that we were staying on a nightly basis. When we went for dinner, you could spot all of the newlyweds across the restaurant, and the amount of interaction that was actually taking place between these two people was negligible. There was pockets of conversation, but largely there was a huge amount of interaction with their respective smartphones, which I just found incredibly odd. It might be a generational thing. It might be because of the generation and the age that I am, but in terms of actually seeing firsthand how the impact of technology and digital was shaping how we interact with one another, it was fascinating to see. So yeah, going back to my point here. So what does this mean within B2B, and what does it mean in terms of digital transformation? Because within the consumer space and within our personal lives, it's clearly had this big shift and big impact, and it's arguably making us less human. Now my major point is within B2B, statistically, and in terms of all of what we're seeing with B2B brands at the moment, it's having the reverse effect. It's not about trying to make us less human; it's about trying to make us more human. So a lot of the statistics out there are pointing towards B2B brands needing to be far more conversational, to be far more conscious of how they humanize their exterior, to be more accessible as a brand and to be more open, and that comes all the way down through the sales funnel in terms of all the activity we do as marketeers. So to kind of drill into that a bit more, I think it's important we take a further step back and go, okay, right, there are some significant shifts within B2B. Digital is is driving the vast majority of those trends and those shifts and those audience behavior movements. But where does that leave B2B as a discipline, as a kind of an industry? And across 20 years, there's been some things that still haven't changed. And I think it's worth just reminding ourselves of, B2B has always been a complex industry, a complex discipline. We typically have to deal with multiple buyer personas. That's not changed. It's a tough gig when you're having to look at matrix-based selling, multiple solutions, multiple products across vertical markets, across different decision-maker communities. B2B marketing, this is a bit of a sweeping generalization, but it is still lacking investment in many industries, and the age-old do more with less is still very prevalent. Less money, less headcount, even coming out of the economic downturn, certainly within the UK, that there's still a kind of a freeze on headcount within marketing departments, which makes it tough for our clients. But where we are today is there's definitely a level of confusion that I'm seeing within the market, within our customers, as to how they kind of grapple with the kind of the current status quo and how they move forwards with some real intent. So we're in a generational flux. We're seeing that in terms of decision-making cycles, the younger audiences are being more and more empowered, and there's this kind of changing shift between power bases within B2B organizations where the C-suite is no longer necessarily the be-all and end-all, and we're getting decision-making happening across middle management and potentially down into below. So digital transformation, it's a term that's hugely used. It's a saturated term, and it's one that means different things to different people. Where did it all start? It started with the moment that work grew legs. The moment the BlackBerry kind of started to really gather traction, and workforces started to take their emails with them in their pockets. You then had the wave of smartphones, which completely changed things up and brought work and play into the same device. So B2B audiences all of a sudden were within a 1 minute period would have a consumer experience, a personal life experience with a brand. And then very quickly go into potentially having a work B2B type experience. So as a result, within that experience window, undoubtedly there's a bit of a kind of a clash. And that's kind of born about, this is an obvious example to use, but it's a very relevant one. The way Amazon brought about its personalization and the logic behind it, that whole kind of customers who bought this would also like this, that whole principle changed up how B2B audiences wanted to be interacted with from B2B brands. The expectations changed because, if I'm getting this great, relevant and compelling experience from a consumer brand, and then I go in very quickly to then receive a 40-page thought leadership piece from a B2B brand in a PDF, that those two experiences just don't stack up. I'm going to feel underwhelmed, and I'm largely going to feel not inclined to engage with that kind of B2B dialogue or kind of marketing experience. So audiences, certainly in the last 5-10 years, have started to shift. Their expectations are changing, and it's still going on. Social came in, socialized the whole space. We then have the big digital brands of the moment, and this kind of wave of disruptors that are changing the landscape within B2B, and changing how we actually physically work within the spaces and environments and offices that we work with on a daily basis. I think this is a great example. There was a UK retailer called Tyrac that in the mid 1990s had about 950 stores up and down the UK. By the kind of mid 2000s, it went into receivership because people simply weren't wearing ties. And that's a direct correlation to the cultures within the businesses of Amazon and the big digital brands, which had a far more relaxed stance and a very open culture within those organizations, which started to wash through and change our attitudes and approaches within B2B. And then, my point earlier around this kind of shifting power base and how decisions are made within B2B, statistically we're seeing the younger audience starting to really punch through and being given more and more power. So the 18 to 34-year-old bracket is continuing to rise, which is important to us as B2B marketers, because the 18 to 34-year-olds have grown up in a largely digital world. So these are the digital natives who will want a certain type of engagement experience from us as B2B marketers. So we need to be kind of conscious of this. You then have the big push of mobile, where lots of examples of where mobile is now starting to really become the kind of environment of choice for decision makers. So lots and lots of research and consideration takes place on mobile devices or when people are commuting. And the final point on there, only 17% have never researched outside of work hours. So the whole muddying of the water between my professional life and my personal life, it no longer really exists. We work and play in kind of a constant state. And then the good old funnel and how this has shifted. So when I was client side, it was very much on the left-hand side of the funnel, where marketing was all about that kind of top of funnel awareness. So lots and lots of outbound activity to drive that noise and that initial awareness. And then sales would then sift through all of that kind of lead generation and then start to drive the rest of the sales cycle. Where we are today, marketing is responsible for probably 70-80% of the kind of the decision-making process now, because people are doing a lot of it from their desktop, and sales are coming in right at the bottom end. So, for us as B2B marketers, our remit and our responsibility is, it's never been greater. And we then are faced with a kind of a technology landscape. And, in terms of digital transformation, what we're looking at on the screen now, these are the tools that we need to work through and consider in terms of how we're going to transform our marketing practices and the B2B brands within which we're working or working with. And this is a crazy statistic here. We are looking at a technology space that's specific to helping marketers go from 150 vendors to 5,000 in 5 years. And certainly from my own experiences working with our clients, this is tough. This is a really, really tough landscape to look at and work out how you're going to navigate this, make the right decisions, choose the right technologies that's going to help underpin how you drive that transformation. So against this kind of backdrop, what is actually happening out there? How are B2B brands making digital a transformative toolkit for them to take positive steps forward and drive results for their organizations? So I want to take some of that kind of stimulus, the previous slides that I've just kind of gone through, which is a bit of a melting pot and a kind of a potted background to how we've ended up where we are today, and then drill that down into, right, okay, here's some practical examples of how people are getting to grips with digital to help drive transformation. So the first thing is persona development. So here's an example here of probably what we were all doing about 5-10 years ago, where it was kind of a top trump style persona card, which we used to help steer how we were creating content, what was interesting to these people. but it was only kind of superficial, really. But where we are today is we due to the digital tools we have at our disposal, the research we can do from the desktop, and the rapid kind of ability to create much deeper understanding of our audiences and our customers. We have a much greater capability to really understand what makes our customers tick and what's going to be relevant and powerful for them in terms of how we communicate with them. So, here's an example of some persona work we've done with a B2B brand, where we've actually looked to not only look at the individual, but then look at the world that shapes them on a daily basis. So, who are the influencers that have the ear of our target individual? Who are the trade bodies that they engage with and that they're part of? What do those communities look like? What are the brands that are actually shaping them within their kind of key areas of interest? Because in order to be relevant, in order to be compelling and gain mindshare, it's not just about competing with your known competitors. It's about competing with the brands within the industry that you work within, or potentially outside, that are getting that mindshare from your kind of target audience. So it's important you kind of step back and take a wider view on the individual and what's actually kind of shaping them. So then the next kind of area beyond kind of the persona development space, and if anyone has interest in or is currently looking at personas at the moment, I'd love to have a conversation with you. We've got some fantastic examples of the depth to which you can really very, very detailed human understanding of how B2B audiences are kind of changing. So the next area is marketing automation, which undoubtedly a lot of you will be grappling with, and be at different kind of stages of how you're working with marketing automation platforms. We've got experience across most of the known ones: Eloqua, Marketo, Pardot, etc. But where we have seen the greatest level of success with marketing automation platforms, but also just digital platforms in general, is where the technology is deployed using emotional intelligence, which combines really good content with some good understanding of human behavior and how B2B audiences are consuming content. Okay, so it's kind of a wash up of some human psychology, some good understanding of the personas, and then making kind of best use of the technology at hand. So a kind of a quick case study here is some of the work that we did with PayPal and continue to do with PayPal. This specific example was a campaign that we ran into the small to mid-size business sector within the UK, and latterly it's also gone out into areas of Europe. So what we did here was we flipped things for PayPal. So previously they had been marketing heavily to the kind of the small business owners and that kind of SME space with a very heavy brand kind of product and service first proposition, but they weren't really getting any traction. So this is a lead nurture program that was based on getting that initial point of engagement and then taking a prospect through a series of different triggered communications to get them to a point where they would then qualify for a sales follow-up. However, because of the approach they were taking, they weren't getting over that first hurdle. They weren't getting that initial engagement to then trigger the rest of the kind of the nurture program. So what we did is we kind of changed things up, and we kind of did some analysis. We did some research, and we found out that the way in which PayPal were talking to these small businesses was alienating. It wasn't speaking the language. It wasn't human enough to kind of capture the imagination of the small business owner. So we then went out and we interviewed some of their small businesses. We then started to tell the stories of those businesses, the ups and downs that they've faced and been through. And we then started to package that up into a series of kind of different case studies and content assets, and really try and bring those stories and hero them and make it about the kind of these inspirational people and their businesses more than it was about PayPal. Because to lead heavy on PayPal, they're a big multinational brand, and to many SMEs, they felt that they wouldn't be relevant to them. So we needed to kind of bring their customers to the forefront and knock PayPal to the kind of background. We used some really nice imagery as well. So at a kind of an instant visual impact level, it started to just resonate with people and kind of capture that initial point of engagement. Then the next phase was, okay, let's really start to dial up the human elements. So let's start to bring through some real people, real faces, not stock photography, but the kind of the wrinkles and the warts and all of real customers, to start to bring some level of a kind of emotive, this is people like me quality to these communications, so that as the conversation in the nurture program got deeper, we're starting to build more of a kind of a rapport, a digital rapport with these customers. All of these click-throughs kind of led through to landing pages within Eloqua. We were tracking all of the interactions back into Eloqua, and in turn then back into Salesforce. So their sales teams were starting to get fed through sales qualified leads, where people had reached a certain lead score. We then started to, towards the latter stages of the nurture program, we then started to introduce PayPal's products and services more, because there was that relationship. So we could trade up on the good faith and the trust that we built up, and then start to bring through more products and services, and probably deliver a harder selling proposition to those audiences. Here's some examples of the microsites within Eloqua that we created. This is the kind of heavy story heroed around the small business owner, using some simplistic, nice, digestible user experience. The content's very breathable, so people can really get to grips with what the story was about and what we achieved as PayPal within a 2-minute window. Anything more than that, statistically, you're probably not you're going to see a lot of drop off. Results to date are pretty astounding. We're looking at an incredible ROI, and considering where we started, this is a fantastic result for them, and it's kind of paid for itself many times over. The penultimate kind of trend I want to look at here, which within the kind of under the umbrella of digital transformation is a very interesting one. Sales and marketing have always been there's always been some tension between the relationship between sales and marketing. Some of that is born out of the traditional kind of layup and formation for those disciplines within an organization. Marketing were always tasked with being the lead creators, and sales were always the kind of the rainmakers and the closers who would ultimately kind of I suppose win the plaudits. And there's been no love lost in many organizations that I've worked with between the sales and marketing departments. However, that said, I think digital has actually helped bring together a much closer alignment between sales and marketing in the last probably 3 to 4 years. There's technologies out there within what I would class as the sales enablement space, things like Showpad, which are kind of tools that allow marketing to control how their content is being kind of distributed to sales teams, and also give sales teams the capabilities to access the most up-to-date and relevant content in one place, and then use that within their presentations and the environment. So, and that brings about transparency, much closer reporting between the two departments, so that marketing can hold their hands up now and say, actually, we created we spent £100,000 on content in the last 6 months, of which 60% has been used by the sales force within the presentations and the pitches that they've been delivering, which is equated to a conversion rate of X, Y, and Z. So marketing are able to be more accountable in terms of how they are enabling sales, and sales are having their lives made easier because of the digital tools that marketing now have. So sales and marketing are two disciplines and departments that are undoubtedly getting closer, and will continue to get closer. And then the final thing here that I'll kind of end on is Agile. So again, this is a phrase like digital transformation, which is bandied around. The industry press grab hold of, and everyone starts to reference it, and it becomes a buzzword. And like all buzzwords, if you say it too many times, it starts to lose relevance and meaning. So I think at its core, Agile is about a new, I suppose, mindset for marketing. It's come over from IT and project management and Agile project management and methodologies, Scrum and sprints. But how it manifests itself within kind of B2B marketing is a different kind of mindset and approach to how you're going to get marketing materials and communications and products and assets, how you're going to get them produced and out there. We've certainly seen a shift from, I suppose, the long burn 9 to 12 month digital projects with the big reveal at the end. We've seen a shift from those kind of linear waterfall style projects to being more about, okay, let's get some quick wins where we're going to test, we're going to learn, we're going to fail fast. And we're going to get some digital products and assets out there. So at the start of last year, we created something called Sprint Labs, which was kind of born out of this kind of appetite to be more agile within B2B. So this kind of process is trying to run effectively a 6 to 8 week process where we come up with a problem or a challenge. We then rapidly come up with a series of different ways we can approach and address that challenge. We then take one of those ideas, we bring it into conception. We then start to create a kind of a digital concept or asset around that. We then develop it. We then create a prototype. We then release it to an audience, and we then test and we learn and we then release it. So this is worlds apart from how B2B brands or B2B marketing departments typically would get a kind of a digital thing, website, microsite, email campaign, app, whatever it might be, how they would get those out into the market. This is about doing things at speed using new methodologies and new ways of developing in order to get things out there quicker, because whether we like it or not, our audiences are moving at a far greater speed than they used to, and our industries are moving at a far greater speed. So B2B marketing departments can't just rely on these long burn projects anymore. They need to start to adopt new ways of working that are going to give them the ability to get things out there much quicker. We've run some interesting projects with clients using kind of the Sprint Labs principle to help them get things out into the kind of the wider world quicker, but also to help them build internal business cases and case studies so they can go within their organizations and challenge the ways of working that currently exist, and say actually that there are better ways we can work. Sprint Labs isn't necessarily appropriate for everything, but it undoubtedly has a place and will kind of continue to have a place over the next kind of 5 years or so. So with that, I think I'm just over half an hour, but hopefully we've got time for some Q&A. So I'll kind of go back to Rosalie briefly.
Thank you, James. Okay, we'll go ahead and take some questions now. Just as a reminder, if you haven't done so already, please be sure to submit your questions by clicking the Q&A button at the top of your screen. Looks like we do have some questions that came in, so let's get started. James, could you please give some more examples of where the Sprint Labs process can be applied?
So a couple of examples spring to mind. So one of them is an app, a B2B app that we created, very much in the kind of the sales enablement space. So this was for a financial services brand that kind of works in the kind of the broker kind of stockbroker community. So the challenge we were looking to address there was, how do we arm the brokers with real-time information on what's happening within the kind of the FTSE and the kind of stock exchange. So there was lots of unknowns, because it's a big subject area to tackle with huge amounts of information. So the Sprint Labs process was actually really applicable, because we were able to get something out there and learn really, really quickly. So that was a scenario of getting a kind of a minimum viable product, as it's called, something developed within an 8-week period, given to the brokers to kind of beta and test, and then learn a huge amount as to how they're engaging with that kind of app and the sorts of data that they want. So as a result of those learnings, we're now kind of bringing that background into a full product development cycle. But it's a good example of using Sprint Labs as a kind of a pre-runner for kind of a much bigger project, but it allows you to base the bigger project on hard evidence. But yeah, we've used Sprint Labs also to help redevelop certain sections of websites. So if your analytics, your Google Analytics are telling you there's a specific problem or drop-offs within your website, we can potentially carve out a new user experience of that website and then test that. We've done that with a couple of other brands as well.
All right, brilliant. Another question. In the PayPal example, how long did it take you to deliver those sort of results?
So that was about a 12-month process. The early stages of that project involved learning a lot. I'd be lying if I said we didn't get it. I'd be lying if I said we got it right first time. We absolutely didn't. But the great thing about doing work in that marketing automation space using platforms like Eloqua is, when you do go wrong, you know exactly where you've gone wrong. So you can identify it and then look to rectify it and roll out a kind of an improved version to try and get a better uptake. So yeah, in total around about 12 months, but the kind of campaign's still rolling on.
All right. Another question. We have a lot of target groups, product lines, and segments. How can you do the 7 to 8 week Sprint Labs with so many target group, product lines, and segments? Is that possible?
I would say it's not possible for a Sprint Labs type approach. What I would say is, if there's a specific target audience or a specific kind of product set or solution set that's that kind of jumps up as being a good case. Again, we have done this with other clients to isolate that and then use it as a pilot, and that's where Sprint Labs are great, because you can kind of ring fence a certain audience or a couple of audiences and maybe a couple of solutions, and then drive a kind of a Sprint Labs process. But the fundamentals and the principles that we would be addressing, I'd guess, would probably have some relevance across the wider kind of matrix of audiences and markets that you're looking to engage with.
All right, thank you. Another question. How to differentiate if we all embrace the conversational, more human approach when delivering relevant content in B2B relations?
Sorry, Rosalie, I missed the start of that. Sorry.
How to differentiate if we all embrace the conversational, more human approach when delivering relevant content in B2B relations?
I think that comes down to things like personalization and experience. So it's not new news that the B2B brands need to kind of be more human and to be more open and accessible to their audiences. So I think it is a very good question. Assuming that you're making steps to do that, then how do you kind of make a difference then and be different to competitors? And I think that comes down to how you can personalize that experience. So once you kind of open yourselves up and you're more engaging and you're more human, how do you then develop that relationship with your customer? And that can be borne out through personalization. So, that can be personalization on your website, personalization through your outbound comms. That's about ultimately delivering a better experience. Statistically, functionality and features on B2B websites are now becoming increasingly important at getting better levels of engagement, and that's all about experience. So I think it's a big tick in the box to be more accessible and more open and more human. But then the next kind of phase is how do you then create an absolutely fantastic customer experience that makes the customer feel special and individual to them and that relationship they have with you.
All right, thank you. Do you feel or see some differences across Europe in terms of B2B transformation adoption, for instance, between France, UK, Germany?
I think that the levels of adoption around technology, okay, so starting with the kind of tech platforms that are in play, I would say that the kind of UK and Germany are probably a little bit more advanced than the French market in terms of the levels of adoption or how far down the line they've come with embracing those kind of more transformative technology platforms. But I would say the kind of the communication challenge, so ignoring the technology, the kind of the communication challenge and trying to create more digestible user experiences and more kind of human-based experiences. I'd say it's a big kind of melting pot, really. There's great examples in each of those markets where B2B brands are doing things far better than their competitors. So I think one of the points I made right at the outset of the presentation is B2B is in a state of transition and confusion, and I think that's not specific to any geography at the moment. I think it's kind of across the board, and there are people who are less confused than others, and there are people who are more advanced than others.
All right, thank you. Looks like that's all the time we have for today. If we didn't get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you individually. I'd like to mention that we have more webinars in this series coming up. Our next webinar in this series will be on audience intelligence, using social data to inform content, paid media and influencer activation, which will take place on the 16th of November. To find out more and to register, please visit our events page on our website, tlewis.com. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining. As mentioned at the start of this webinar, we will send everyone an email with a link to the recording of today's presentation. Thanks again. Thanks, James, very much for this great presentation, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.